to discuss with you sort of the bad boy stories of the underbelly of the art world. Usually in art history, you get the candy-coated version. But there's also a dark side, which as a police officer, it kind of strikes an interest, of course. But in his book that Mr. Kronemeyer was talking about, Ulrich Boser's book, The Gardner Heist, he quoted a famous art world sleuth, Harold Smith, as saying that when it comes to fine art and the boundaries between right and wrong, beautiful and ugly, those boundaries often become thin and hazy. Some of the art world's most famous personalities, like Pablo Picasso here, have been some of its least savory characters. Rembrandt ran art scams, for example, stole from his son's inheritance, and once had a mistress imprisoned in a mental institution rather than pay her alimony. Caravaggio was violent and committed a homicide. Courbet and Baudelaire fought at the barricades in the Revolution of 1848. Verlaine and Rimbaud were followed by the secret police in Paris. Everywhere they went, those police kept secret records on their poets and artists and spied on many of them, but the list goes on and on. Let's take, for instance, one of my favorite eras, the Bohemian artist communities of Montmartre and Montparnasse of Paris at the beginning of the 20th century. Modigliani and his pal Utrillo were constantly being picked up for drunken, disorderly conduct. Utrillo was an alcoholic and drank 8 liters of wine a day. Both Picasso and Alfred Jarry, but Jarry was the more frequent violator, cocked and waved their pistols in the faces of drunken adversaries at the slightest insult, and they loved to shoot out the gas lamps that lined the streets. In fact, pistol packing was in vogue in the artist quarters of those days. Picasso carried a Browning everywhere he went, which he shot in the air in festive drunken folly, fired out his window every morning as an alarm clock to awaken his artist friends. While dueling was illegal in this era, fistfights were not considered gentlemanly behavior, go figure, so the artists resorted to crossing swords and cocking pistols quite frequently. These neighborhoods and a few of the cafes located in them were breeding grounds for the popular anarchist movement. A number of illegal anarchist newspapers were being printed and distributed there. The artist Juan Gris was erroneously arrested after police officials mistakenly identified him as an anarchist named Garnier, who was the main suspect in a band of political bombers in Paris. So here we have Picasso wanted for possession of stolen art. In 1911, we'll talk about this theft in a little while, the Mona Lisa was stolen from the Louvre. Both Pablo Picasso and his close friend Apollinaire were brought in by the French Suerte, the police, as suspects in this crime. In 1907, a friend of Apollinaire's named Géry Piré stole several valuable artifacts from a storeroom at the Louvre, simply by placing them under his overcoat and walking out. Both Picasso and Apollinaire bought the objects from Piré and later denied knowing they were stolen, but they denied they were stolen. They knew that they were stolen, but Picasso's lover, Fernand d'Olivier, stated that Piré warned Picasso on the day he bought the small Iberian heads. He liked little Iberian heads and masks and things, not to display them, but to keep them hidden from view. Picasso kept the objects in an inconspicuous place, fully aware of their illicit nature, so he knew what he was getting into. After the theft of the Mona Lisa, Piré sold his story along with a full confession and a statuette that he stole from the museum to prove that he did it to the Paris Journal. Piré wanted a little cash and some notoriety, so he wanted to cash in on the Mona Lisa theft. This article further humiliated the Louvre and implemented Picasso and Apollinaire. Both Picasso and Apollinaire were overcome with fear when the story came out, and the Suerte was looking for them. Both were subject to deportation due to alien status, and they contemplated throwing the artifacts into the Seine. Picasso was brought in for questioning, where he gave up his Iberian heads and was released. Apollinaire, the poet, was arrested on September 11, 1911. He was not released until he was arrested on September 7th. He was not released until September the 12th. He was extremely frightened and hated to stay in a cell. However, for the years after the fact, he would boast of being the only man in France to be arrested for this famous crime. So he kind of, boasted about his stay in the cell. This is Tony Shafrazi, wanted for vandalism. In February of 1974, an Iranian artist named Tony Shafrazi entered the Museum of Modern Art in New York and spray-painted "Kill Lies All" in red spray paint across Pablo Picasso's Guernica. As he did this, he yelled, "I am an artist." Shafrazi claimed he committed this despicable act against the Spanish genius's masterpiece as a protest against the U.S. action in My Lai. The vandal was arrested, charged with criminal mischief, and released on $1,000 bail, so he got a little slap on the hand for doing that to this masterpiece. The painting was coated in a protective varnish and looked as good as new after cleaning. This man now owns a gallery on 26th Street at 554 West 26th Street. He's a gallery owner. He shows Keith Haring and Basquiat. Next. Michelangelo Buonarroti. Now let me tell you what this is. I'm a composite artist for the police department, and I did these faces of artists who committed crimes. I did them in the style of a police composite sketch. So this is what you're looking at in pencil on paper. Michelangelo Buonarroti wanted for art fraud. In 1446, Michelangelo Buonarroti sculpted a sleeping Cupid out of marble and buried it in sour earth. This acidic dirt made the sculpture appear much older than it really was. The Cupid was sold as an antiquity, a Roman antiquity, through a dealer named Cardinal Raffaele Riario di San Giorgio. Someone informed the cardinal that he had been duped, and he demanded his money back. He gave up an original Michelangelo, which undoubtedly today would be worth a fortune. This Cupid ended up in the D'Este collection in Mantua, and unfortunately it's lost today. But that's Michelangelo's little art fraud. Next. Now one of my favorites, Alfred Jarry, wanted for illegally possessing and discharging firearms, aggravated assault, terroristic threats, and drunken disorderly behavior. Today, Alfred Jarry is best known for his work Ubu Roy in creating pataphysics. Pataphysics proposed that an observation of the universe began with its paradoxes, exceptions, and anything that lay outside habitual conventional thought. But in the days of Bohemian Montparnasse, Jarry was well known for packing heat and pulling it to solve everyday problems, such as shooting in the air to silence noisy children, which would work with my kids once in a while. Waving it around the room waving it around to make room on an overcrowded bus. Drawing it on pedestrians when they blocked his way while riding his bicycle. Breton and the Surrealists met him in 1905 at the Closerie des Lilas in Montparnasse and venerated him for his passions of poetry and for gunslinging, passions that he held in common with this gang of painters from Place d'Avignon. The gunslinging Jarry drank very heavy, especially absinthe, which he poetically referred to as absinthe. According to Rothschild, one of Jarry's closest friends, he drank a daily helping of 2 liters of wine and 3 Pernods in the morning for breakfast. Then he had liqueurs and brandy at lunch. He had before dinner aperitifs, and before bed he would have a Pernod with a drop of writer's ink. His gunslinging antics in Bohemia are innumerable. One time he took a disliking to a patron at a cafe who was sitting with a lovely lady. Jarry pulled his revolver and shot out the mirror, causing it to shatter. Then turned to the woman and exclaimed, "Now that the ice is broken, we can talk." This was a play on the words, because in French, the word for both glass and ice is glace. So he's a poet. He knows how to use these words. On another occasion, a sculptor friend of Picasso's annoyed Jarry by talking too much. Jarry ordered him to shut up and get lost, but the sculptor refused and continued to blab. Jarry pulled out his weapon, shot the curtains, and the sculptor decided it wise to comply and took an oath of silence. On another occasion, Jarry was in the garden of an apartment he rented and decided to uncork champagne bottles by shooting off the corks. The owner of the building, which was in Corbeil, screamed, "Stop before you shoot one of my children," and Jarry simply replied, "Don't worry about it. If I hit one, I'll make you another." Jarry died at age 34 of tubercular meningitis and left his dearest earthly possession, his revolver, to Pablo Picasso. Jarry was one of the biggest proponents of the philosophy of life, the philosophy that life must be lived in an inseparable unity with art, which I also believe life and art must be lived together. The Surrealist Breton stated that, starting with Jarry, much more than Oscar Wilde, the distinction long deemed necessary between art and life was blurred until it was finally abolished in its very principle. So art and life are a seamless unity. Salvador Dali, wanted for art fraud, one of the biggest fraudsters of art. Salvador Dali signed thousands of blank pieces of print paper in dealings with dirty publishers, which resulted in an estimated $12 million a year earnings. He liked to make money. The market in Dali prints was damaged from this, and many fake Dali prints with forged signatures began to circulate as well. A huge scam that ended in 1991 in a 1991 raid of Long Island warehouse where 50,000 fake Dali prints were confiscated. Also, 20,000 Mirots and 600 Chagalls were seized, all bogus prints. Don't be fooled by a Dali's signature on a print. He signed thousands of blank sheets of paper that were later used to produce Dali images, usually paintings. More often, his signature was forged on such reproductions. He signed his name in so many ways that experts are at a loss in verifying an authentic Dali signature. Totally complicit. They said, sign these papers and we're going to make money, and he wanted the checks. Unfortunately, one of our greatest artists had this devious way of thinking about it. This is one of my artworks. I do fingerprints. We did his image on a fingerprint criminal card in fingerprint ink. Next. And this is on a Scotland Yard Art and Antiques Unit crime poster. The great fraudster. Oh, the title of that is Quiere un reloj? Like, you want to watch? Okay. Salvador Dali was supposed to speak in the prison Rikers Island. He couldn't show up because he got sick. He was going to speak to the prison population that cheered him up, kind of good for the morale. When he didn't show up, they were pissed, needless to say. So he gave them this print. He gave it to the prison population for their gift forever. Salvador Dali didn't do any time in the joint, but this joint did a 16-year bit until it hung proudly on Rikers Island until some dirty prison guards stole it in 2001. In 1985, it was appraised at $175,000. Some of the guards were arrested and have cop pleas, but this joint is still in the wind. So the guys are arrested, and we can't find this. Next. One of our SBA alumni, Keith Haring, wanted for graffiti. Keith Haring, like many young artists of New York in the 1980s, used the streets and subways as his canvas. His artistic language developed from the clandestine artistic incursions he made. Through graffiti, Haring developed his own personal vocabulary. Haring was a frequent subway commuter, and one day he was inspired to draw on the many old advertisements in the subways that were covered with black paper. He drew in white chalk and depicted babies, human figures, flying saucers, animals, television sets, to name a few. The New York subway commuters and art collectors and dealers became very familiar with Haring's work and through these drawings. He was, like I said, a School of Visual Arts alumni, died of AIDS on February 16, 1990 at age 31. So many artists meet a bad death if they can't control these forces that sometimes take them over. Michelangelo Caravaggio, wanted for homicide. I saved the sickest guy for last. Michelangelo Caravaggio killed a man named Ranuccio Tommasoni da Terni on May 6, 1606 on the Campo di Marzo in Rome. This homicide was committed by the genius of Baroque painting after a heated argument broke out during a game of rackets. Caravaggio was not unknown to the police at the time, which were called sbirri, prior to this crime. He was a brawler, a womanizer. He liked to drink and gamble. He frequently got locked up in Rome for his delinquent nature. Among his rap sheets are, in 1600 he was charged with assaulting. In 1601 he wounded a guard at Castello Sant'Angelo. In 1603 he was accused of defamation. April 1604 he was locked up for starting a fight at Il Moro, the Moor. It was the famous establishment he frequented daily. This fight started after Caravaggio threw a plate of artichokes in the waiter's face. October 1604 he was arrested for throwing stones at the Roman sbirri, at the police. He's throwing rocks at them. May 1605, arrested for illegal use of arms. July 1605, wounded a man in a fight over a woman. May 29, 1606, killed Tommasoni. The artist fled to Naples, then to Malta, where he was knighted into the Maltese Order of St. John. The guy was a genius, but uncontrollable genius. He was knighted into the Maltese Order of St. John. After attacking a fellow knight, he was forced to flee to Sicily. He returned to Naples en route to Rome, where he waited for a pardon from the Pope for his homicide, and he died of a fever on the shores of Port Urgli. What happened was, when he left Naples, the boat left with his belongings. He was mad, so he was going to Rome. He had to walk along the shores to meet the boat and get his belongings, cursing the whole way, and I believe he died of malaria. So that's a violent end to a violent life.